Welcome. You're listening to Ask the Doulas, a podcast where we talk to experts from all over the country about topics related to pregnancy, birth, postpartum, and early parenting. Let's chat.
Hello. This is Kristin with Ask the Doulas, and I am thrilled to chat with Jenn Johnson today. Jenn is the owner of RX for Growth, and our topic today is all about trusting your intuition with your pregnancy and your health, not only in pregnancy, but also in the postnatal phase. Jennifer Johnson is a wife, mother of two, and a registered nurse in Ontario, Canada. She spent the last 14 years of her career in the emergency room of big and small hospitals all over Northern and Southern Ontario. She's personally been a part of all the heartbreak, drama, bullying, life and death moments, and then also trying to cope in the ER during an ongoing pandemic. Her books are her rally cry to all other nurses struggling through this pandemic and finding they are losing their love of nursing. They are burned out, depressed, and feeling hopeless. The love, caring, and camaraderie of nursing has changed for all of us, and the expectation that nurses continue to show up to a job that puts their lives on the line is new to them. And obviously, coping has been hard, not only in the pandemic, but just for healthcare workers in general. So now more than ever, Jenn is focused on supporting nurses and helping raise each other. So welcome, Jenn.
Thank you.
I have such a respect for nurses, working with labor and delivery nurses closely as a birth doula, and also in my experience in the postpartum units and the antepartum units with the nursing staff there.
Yeah, that's a job that it's one of the floors where I'm like, I've got some education and background in labor and delivery. I've never actually physically been hired on labor and delivery and worked it. So much kudos to those men and women, because like, man, am I ever triggered by loud noises, and that whole department is nonstop dinging and screaming and yelling. And so kudos to those people who can sit there and take moms through it, because, having had two kids, your body takes over and you are absolutely out of control. Like your body's doing it for you. And the nurse, I thought I could rely on the nurse background, but man, she flew away real fast. Yeah. And you're at square one with everybody else. You're just another scared mom trying to get through it. And the pain is new. The fear is new. Everything's new. And you're not sure what to expect and how things go and how the day goes. So it's kudos to those guys, because every specialty is their own special people. But I've got a lot of labor and delivery friends, and man, they are the most special people.
Well, I feel that way about the ER department with, you never know what you're going to get.
That's the fun part.
You like adventure. Okay.
So there's an ongoing meme that circulates the ER and labor and delivery, and somebody comes in and the ER nurse, she's pregnant. Oh, I hope it's not a baby. I hope it's a snake. And here's the labor and delivery. Oh my God, I hope it's a baby, not a snake. And it's just,
hilarious.
We're very comfortable with chaos and weird, but for some reason, the responsibility of helping bring in another life and all the legalities and risks associated with birth and pregnancy scares the living daylights out of us. So we're very happy when, you're over 20 weeks and we're like, you know what, you get to go right up to L&D. Have a great day.
Right. I know when I had my daughter, there wasn't yet a separate entrance for our women's center. And so I went through the emergency room and triage there. Yeah. And people had head injuries and like so many different things going on. And I was just in labor having a baby. So
right. This is the normal thing. The rest of these are accidents. Right.
I know. Everyone, people are coughing and sick, and it was interesting. But now we have a whole separate entrance and triage. So very nice.
That's so epic.
Yeah. Well, I would love to hear about your personal journey and how that really led you to want to not only advocate for nurses, but also speak for mothers.
So I started out with the biology degree, just kind of barely getting through, failed organic chemistry, and was just like, okay, this is clearly, I've never failed anything. What is happening? And thankfully I had a girlfriend in residence who was already in nursing. And so we'd pour over her textbooks and kind of go like, oh, okay, like this is cool. This is what I want to learn. So swapped into nursing, graduated in 3 years out of 4 because we had a fast track program and I already had some university credits, and ended up meeting my husband and starting my first job. And my first job was in a very, very small hospital where there was only one nurse for emerge, one nurse for the floor with one RN for the floor with 2 RPNs, and maybe 14 beds, but the town size was maybe 5,000 people. Okay. So we were doing it all. We were doing theoretically labor and delivery and med surg and emerge and all this. And you just kind of rotate back and forth based on the day. Unfortunately, they did end up closing the L&D portion down fairly soon after I started, which kind of sucked because I was like, oh, like I'm doing my perinatal certificate. Like I could help. Like I got my fetal monitoring certificate and, I'm all ready, but here we are on to the next kind of thing. Ended up moving down south to Southern Ontario, getting married, having my babies, and it wasn't until getting pregnant and having trouble getting pregnant that it was like, oh man, there is so much more to this other world that I had no idea about. So thankfully, after about a year or so, we ended up getting pregnant with my first, and pregnancy's going, okay, puking my brains. I'm thinking, okay, this is all normal and this is what's happening. And it's like, okay, well, it's kind of continuing, but I'm not hungry. I'm nauseous. I'm losing weight. And just something wasn't quite right, but I wasn't cluing into it. Thankfully, we had midwives, and the midwife appointments up in Ontario, you've got 30 minutes to 45 minutes with your midwife. And so you chit chat and you hit all the marks versus kind of the OB route where a lot of people I knew were kind of like in and out very quickly. And it was like, okay, let's check your weight, let's check your pee, and like out the door you go. So I was so thankful that we were able to get in with a midwife and like a phenomenal team in the area. So it wasn't until I was 38 weeks and literally walking out of one of these appointments going like, and my midwife and one of my midwives were just chatting and we're just going, oh, hey, I'm like, hey, my feet are so itchy. Like I'm up for an hour every night itching my feet. Is there a salve? Is there something like a medication I could take or something? I'm like, it's just driving me nuts. And she looks at me and she goes, oh, crap. You were so textbook. I'm like, what do you mean was? So she kind of explains to me, okay, it could be cholestasis in pregnancy. And we're just going to send you to from the office down the QEW to our sister hospital. And we're going to just get you checked out kind of thing. I'm like, all right, well, not a big deal. So not thinking at the moment that it was anything too much to worry about. Genius me, I started Googling like like any good scared mother. And of course, all that keeps coming up is cholestasis in pregnancy. The risk is late term stillbirth. And so at 38 weeks, I'm losing my marbles going like, it's a 25, 30-minute drive down the highway. And I'm going, what is happening? Like, oh my God, everything's changed. And so we go up to OB, we get checked out. They draw bile salts, which is a very specific test that is used to diagnose cholestasis. And so I'm sitting there, I'm being triaged up in OB. They've got me all hooked up. They've got Wyatt all hooked up while he's still in me. And the OB comes back and goes, okay, so so your bile salts are really elevated. You're not getting up off the stretcher. We're going to induce you right away. And I'm like, look, we left my car in one place. Our house is in another. I don't have anything with me. We're just going to go. We'll get all the stuff. We'll come back. And the OB was like, absolutely not. You are not getting up off this stretcher. We're inducing you this instant. I'm like, holy crap. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm like, so everything changed very, very quickly. It was already probably 5, 6 at night. And again, the Googling, and you're just going like, well, what is this? I've never heard of this. I've even got a perinatal certificate and I've never heard of this. And they're like, oh, it's so rare and it's very nonspecific. And so you go through the beginning induction process with the misoprolol, the one they stick up there. We started with that.
Oh, Cervidil.
Cervidil, thank you. Started with that. And then they moved me to a room and they put in the IV and we got Pitocin started. So I had some experience with Pitocin being the one to adjust it to all my previous labor and delivery moms, I am so sorry. Oh my God.
Yeah, it can be intense. I've not
Worst.
personally experienced it, but my clients certainly have.
I am so sorry to my moms that I kept increasing the Pitocin. And I'm like, I had no idea that the pit pains were so bad because, a nice regular average birth, you're very slowly working up to the pain. Whereas the pit pains, like you go from 0 to 60 in an instant, haven't had time to kind of cope or adjust or anything. And you're just like going. And so tried to get an epidural. The epidural failed 3 different times. And by the third time that they were I think they'd actually gotten it in the third time, but as they were kind of taping it up my back, I go, oh my God, I gotta push. My girlfriend, who actually was my OB nurse, like, thank God she was there. She goes, okay, well, we're just going to check you, but you were only like 3-4 centimeters, an hour ago, whatever. And I'm like, no, I gotta push. So she checks me. She's like, well, so you're 10 centimeters and he's right there. And I'm like, no. Bolus me the epidural. Like, I want the pain meds. She's like, no, we're way past that. I'm very sorry. I'm like, no, like, don't tell me please give me the meds. So Wyatt was out. He was deemed a precipitous delivery because he was out in an hour 45 from time of water break. Wow. And it was just this whirlwind of everything happened so very fast. So then you're in new mom mode. And when everything starts to kind of settle, the dust starts to settle just a little bit. You're finally feeling like yourself again. I get my liver enzymes checked again. They have come back down to normal. We're all good that way. Doing my research, because I'm like, now I'm super curious about cholestasis. Like, now that I know about it, like, let's see what's going on. So the time when I read things, they didn't know whether it was the physical weight of the pregnancy, the chemical weight of the pregnancy, the hormonal weight of the pregnancy, what caused for some reason your body not to process your bile salts anymore. So what they would do is they would actually kind of accumulate in your body, but settle to your feet as like little crystals within your system. And so that was what was causing the itchiness. And so I'm like, okay, let's do all this research and let's get going. And I'm so curious about this now. And so reading, if you've got the same baby daddy, you have got a 70 to 90% chance of getting cholestasis again. And I'm going, oh, great. So the miracle is not getting cholestasis again. So I'm like, okay, well, yes, it was worried and whatever else, but because everything happened so fast with Wyatt, not super concerned. So normally I think they find it roughly 34 to 36 weeks is when it's normally something happens where you're having symptoms and they detect an elevation in your blood work. At 28 weeks, I sat there and I'm going, okay, I'm not sick. I don't feel unwell, but something is telling me that there's something wrong. And so at 28 weeks, I had OB coverage, but was still with my midwives. So with the cholestasis, I did go back to my midwives and say, hey, like, I'm just not feeling off. Is there any way we can do the bile salts just to see if they're elevated? And sure enough, at 28 weeks, they were already starting to climb. So I'm like, oh, here we go. So went back to actually ended up with the same OB who delivered Wyatt. And it's like, okay, so you're getting weekly blood work that was not covered by OHIP, which is the Canadian healthcare system. So I had to pay out of pocket. Fun. No. That was like $70 a week for blood work that I had to fast for. And then it was bi-weekly ultrasounds. So all of a sudden, this pregnancy turned into a full-time job. And I kind of found that, so the bile salts with Elise were just slightly elevated at 28 weeks. I found that me personally, I couldn't eat anything that was super refined sugar or anything deep fried. So kind of for those of us who are of age, The Simpsons, where Homer rubs the burger, he's trying to gain like 150 pounds. He rubs the burger on the wall. And if it's clear, that's your window to gaining all this weight. And so, I was like, okay, so anything beige, and anything deep fried, I'm going to have to see. For some reason, I just got super nauseous with it and it didn't sit well with me. So cutting those out without realizing my bile salts ended up coming down and coming back down into a normal range. So I was like, oh, so this is just diet, because my OB was like, oh, we want you to take these pills. They're usually used for not kidney stones, gallstones. You need to take these, blah, blah, blah. And so me being the great nurse that I am, I went through all of the research and trying to find, a lot of really good evidence-based studies and trials to back this up. I'm worried about my kids. So what are the long-term effects? And trying to do what I could to find any information. Well, because it was not necessarily an off-label use for this medication to use it in pregnancy, but it was kind of like not advised. And when I went to go fill it, the pharmacist called me 3 different times. Do you know what this medication is for? You're pregnant. Does your doctor know you're pregnant? Okay, what's your weight? Are you sure? Like, he really kind of freaked me out as to like, okay, the pharmacist never calls anybody at home. Why is the pharmacist calling me 3 different times, no less, about this medication? So I was super hesitant to take the medication. I ended up not taking it because by the time I got the prescription, everything was filled and we'd been doing the weekly blood work, my bile salts were already coming down. So I said, you know what? My bile salts are already coming down without the medication. I can't find a lot of evidence on this and long-term use and XYZ kind of thing. Trying to explain to my OB that I wasn't comfortable with this. And that was the first time I really got like a lot of pushback from the OB to be like, oh my God, we use this in England all the time. Like, I don't understand why you're not like just taking the medication, and kind of gave me a what for. And I'm like, wow. I've never been on this end before. Like, I've never been
as the nurse, like,
I've never been the patient getting the what for. And do I kind of, the number of times myself, I've kind of gone like, oh, why is this patient not taking their medication? Like, it's the best thing for you. The doctor's prescribed it. We wouldn't be just throwing it at you if we wanted to, kind of thing. So to be on the other end and be kind of refusing and having to advocate for myself, be like, look, I don't understand why the pharmacist was so upset, why there's not a lot of evidence and data to back up the use of this medication in cholestasis in pregnancy. Like, I'm just a little leery. And even just saying I was a little leery, like, that kind of really aggravated the doc. So I was like, oh, like, I've never been, and I can't remember if he knew I was a nurse or not, but I was just like, man, this is weird. Like, okay, note to self, I'm going to have to really keep this in mind for when I come up on the other side of this later in life. And so when people are telling me that they're not taking their medications, maybe to dig a little bit deeper as to why they're not taking their medications. So that was just kind of like a little takeaway. And so went through the pregnancy, bile salts were fine. Everything was great. Halloween rolled around and Elise was due actually like Christmas. Halloween rolls around. This is my favorite holiday. We've got Wyatt out and trick-or-treating. We've got all the candy lying around the house because we're in a busy area. And I kind of binge hard on all the candy. And suddenly my bile salts shot up. So by November, middle of November, my bile salts were all of a sudden elevating. And the OB's looking at me going like, I'm not going to sleep until I induce you. What are you doing Thursday? And this is Tuesday. And I'm like, absolutely nothing. And he goes, okay, we're going to induce you. And I'm like, okay, well, that would make Elise 36 and 6. So 36 6 days, which is technically preemie. So I'm like, okay, we're just kind of like walking that line. Or was she 35 and 9? She was like a blip short of preemie. And so ended up same thing, getting induced right. Like, and this one at least was a scheduled induction. So I'm like, okay, I kind of know what I'm walking into. He's like, call the floor, make sure they've got a bed for you, make sure they've got a nurse for you. And I said, I've got midwives. He's like, I understand, but we still also pair you with an OB nurse. I'm like, okay, great. I know most of the girls on the floor, whatever. And so call 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning. I call, yeah, we've got a bed. Fantastic. I am raring to go. I'm like, let's get this kid out of me. I'm done stressing about what's going to happen. I just want my body back, the whole bit. So we get induced, and thankfully Elise comes out just fine. And going back and looking at test results. So Wyatt, I think by the time we found the cholestasis with him, my bile salts were in the 200s when the range is like 0 to 10. And with Elise, by the time we induced with Elise, I think we were only at like 15, 20. So I'm like, oh, I'm really glad that I didn't know this when we were having Wyatt. Like, I'm really glad, because I think I just would have hit the roof. But it was one of those things where you can trace it back to that feeling of, I'm not sick. Like, I don't feel unwell, but just something in my being is telling me that something's off.
Hey, Alyssa here. I'm just popping in to tell you about our course called Becoming. Becoming a Mother is your guide to a confident pregnancy and birth, all in a convenient 6-week online program. From birth plans to sleep training and everything in between, you'll gain the confidence and skills you need for a smooth transition to motherhood. Live coaching calls with me and Kristin, tons of expert videos including chiropractic care, pelvic floor physical therapy, mental health experts, breastfeeding, and so much more. You'll also get a private Facebook community with other mothers going through this at the same time as you to offer support and encouragement when you need it most. If you'd like to learn more about the course, you can email us at info@goldcoastdoulas.com or check it out at thebecomingcourse.com. We would love to see you there. We also have a book called Supported, Your Guide to Birth and Baby, which makes a beautiful companion to this course. It's a great book for any expecting mother and is the perfect baby shower gift. You can find information on that book at supportedbook.com.
So just getting to the hospital with Elise and the doctor saying, if I don't induce you, what are you doing Thursday? I said, well, nothing. And it's Tuesday. I said, okay, well, he goes, well, we're going to induce you. I'm not going to sleep until we do. So get everything ready. And I said, okay, so call the unit first thing in the morning. And oh yeah, you've got a nurse, you've got a doc. We'll let your midwives know. I'm like, perfect. So 7:30, 8 in the morning, and I'm ready to rock and roll. I've been ready probably since about 5 a.m.
Yeah.
And my husband is all of a sudden having a half an hour long shower and really dragging, and he never eats breakfast. And all of a sudden he's making himself breakfast. I'm like, can we get moving? I'm trying not to just lose it on you. Can we get going? So we didn't end up making it to the hospital till about noon, finally start the induction and just the repeat pit pains. And it's like, okay, this time definitely getting the epidural. And so I had the epidural. It was successful. Thank God.
Right.
So a little bit of a different experience than my son, where there was no time for the epidural kind of thing. So it's like, oh, this is not too bad. And the midwives had been telling me the whole pregnancy, when you do start having contractions, please make it to the hospital ASAP. Your son was precipitous. We expect you to go within like 45 minutes once your water breaks kind of thing. And
Sure.
I'm like, so on high alert. So get to the hospital, start the Pitocin. Nothing really happens too much. It's slow wean. It takes what seems like forever and a day for the doc to kind of come in and break my water. And, I'm like, okay, 45 minutes, let's go. And nothing happens. It's like, okay, we're slow. I'm like, well, what's going on? So waited enough time where I'm like, okay, clearly this isn't moving fast enough. I'm like, and I think it was that time that I decided to get the epidural. It was 45 minutes after the epidural was given that Elise decided to show her adorable little face. She was technically preemie. So we had decided to stay a couple of days. Well, we decided to stay. Her sugars were a little on the rough side. So the nurses and the midwives were like, well, we can either admit her to NICU, put in an IV, get some dextrose, and we can be exclusively breastfed, or we can supplement with formula and we can kind of keep you in the OB side, and, Elise can stay with you and we'll just check her sugars really, really regularly just to make sure that she's going. I said, look, I've already played the blame and the grief game with breastfeeding with Wyatt. That did not go nearly as planned. And to the point of crying in Walmart, looking at the formula, going, it says on the box of the formula, breastfed is best. I'm like, I know breastfed is best, but it's just not working.
It doesn't for everyone, right?
Oh, it's so bad. It's so hard. And again, thinking I was a nurse and I had a little bit of experience with OB, thinking, oh, I can just wing it. No. Stupid. Don't do that. I should have gone to a breastfeeding class. I should have really given it some effort and some planning because again, you hear about all these wonderful breastfeeding stories. You're like, oh, it's going to work perfectly and everything's going to be fine. And it definitely did not.
Yeah.
So when it came to Elise and they're like, oh, are you going to exclusively breastfeed? I'm like, forget that. I've already played that game. I've already cried those tears. Give me the formula. There's no point in invasive procedure if we can just get away with formula for a little while. Not a big deal. So yeah. Okay. And so stayed in the hospital for a few days because not only were her sugars a little irregular, my husband, my son, and my mother-in-law who was visiting all got gastro in the house. So I'm like, okay, I'm clearly not taking a brand new, fresh, preemie baby to a gastro household. This is not happening. So ended up going to my parents and spending a week there. And it actually was lovely to have that experience with my mom and my dad and Elise, and just kind of relax that way. But
Okay, nice.
The whole process is just so crazy. And then to have somebody say like, oh, cholestasis is so rare. And you're like, what do you want to bet? It's not actually so rare. It's just that the symptoms are just so ridiculous. It's itchy feet. You would chalk it up to another, oh, that's just another weird pregnancy symptom, blah, blah, blah.
Right. Like the itchy, dry belly.
Yeah, you're
And
like, oh, it's nothing. It's itchiness. It's not a big deal, except for when you're up itching for an hour and you just can't satisfy the itch. Like it's rough. Your feet start bleeding, then they're sore, and then you don't want to get up, and it's a whole thing.
yeah.
But I'm like, hey, but if more people knew about this very real complication with very serious results or potential outcomes, like we need to start educating. So especially when people come into the ER, I'm very quick to say like, okay, have you had any itchiness in your feet? How far along are you? What are we dealing with today? Because usually it's nausea, vomiting, cramping, bleeding, pain, that kind of thing in the whole spectrum of the pregnancy. But I'm always the one to be like, do your feet itch? And everybody thinks I'm so weird. I'm like, you think it's weird, but here's my story. And then they go, oh, and I'm like, yes. So now another nurse has been educated on this complication. Let's go talk to the patient. Oh, no, that's fine. I'm like, perfect. Another one I don't have to worry about kind of thing. But then it's also educating my doctors too. So we had a patient not even too long ago who I think was 38 weeks and was just nausea, vomiting, couldn't keep anything down. And so I'm just like, okay, well, do you have any itchiness in your feet? She goes, oh yeah, like a little bit. I'm like, pardon me? Like, okay. And then my doc, because she was having abdominal pain as well, also ordered liver function tests and they were kind of elevated already. So I'm like, oh, like this could be a thing. So talking to my doc, I'm like, hey, I don't know if you want to like pass this on to OB, or bile SARS isn't a test we would normally order in the ER because normally results take like a good 24 hours to come back. So it's not something we look into unless we had somebody to follow up that test result, heaven forbid it positive. And so in talking to my doc, he's like, what? He's like, what's cholestasis in pregnancy? I'm like, yes, here we go again. So educating my doc, and again, having that personal story to really hammer that message home, to be like, no, this is actually something that can happen. And it really makes me wonder personally, how many late-term stillbirths were related to cholestasis and just nobody caught it? And like how many of these poor women and poor families are then repeating the process with the same spouse and wondering where that's going to take us. So yeah, being able to advocate for that, to have that conversation with my doc, to make it aware on his end. I mean, how many more people are going to benefit just from me talking about it? So it's one of those things when there's somebody pregnant coming into the ER, I'm kind of all over them like white on rice, not only just to be like, I'm going to check your fetal heart rate, A, because I love that sound, and then B, because I need the practice. I'm sorry, but we also need a fetal heart rate. So it's all the things. So it's one of those things where you don't think it could happen to you, or if you're even aware of it. So to all the mamas, if you've got really, really itchy feet and you're up for an hour every night itching, please talk to your provider, because it's something that is absolutely manageable and you just need a little bit more monitoring. So it's one of those things where we just gotta start talking about it.
Thank you for sharing your story. And I've been to some maternal health conferences where that's been one of the primary topics. And so it was interesting. I have not yet had a birth client who, I mean, and maybe some signs went unnoticed, but who was diagnosed cholestasis. So very interesting stories. And I'm glad that everything turned out well and you advocated for yourself, which is the whole point of, knowing your body, even how you were cutting back foods that weren't agreeing with you and how that made a big difference.
I can remember, like, I'm a huge sweets person, like an absolute huge sweets person, and working shift work. My whole diet is deep fried and sugar. So to then having to go through of like, what else can I eat? What else am I going to be able to tolerate while working shifts and then not pass out from low sugar?
Yeah. And the cafeteria, I mean, there's a lot of fried food and temptations, and then people bring nurses gifts. And so
we appreciate the donuts and the coffee more than you know. We literally run on, especially the ER. The ER runs on spite and caffeine pretty much alone, with a little shot of adrenaline here, there, and everywhere. You want to win your nurse over in 3.2 seconds, bring them coffee, or even just ask, or just say thank you. That's something that we don't often get to hear. I'm thankful that most people who work OB, you get to have that really great connection with the patient, and you grow over potentially a couple of days, maybe even longer if somebody's staying there for a longer period of time for monitoring.
Absolutely.
But most people know their L&D nurse's name, or at least one of them. So it's a lovely little world that I every now and again go, could I? I'm like, yeah, I could, but would I? I think I'll stay in the emerge with like the air of an OB background-ish, and then be able to teach in the ER and have that access to that education within the ER. So I think that's where I'll land. And that's where I think I will stick for now.
I love it. So tell us more about RX for Growth. And again, you have books and other projects.
So many things going on. Clearly, I'm undiagnosed ADHD because I can't stop moving, which also fits with the ER. So RX for Growth,
absolutely.
I can't get a diagnosis because it's just quote unquote anxiety. Thanks. Tips. Again, put off by another provider. That's just, I feel so bad for women with chronic illnesses because I can't even imagine having to deal with this constantly. But prescriptionforgrowth.com, so rxforgrowth.com, is my love child that I started out with. I wrote a book, Nursing Intuition, which helps nurses to really hone in on that trust your gut feeling. And most women know that feeling very, very well, but in the context of the creep factor. But now I'm kind of taking it over to nursing where you're caring for someone and there's just something that says something's not right. I don't know what's going on, but like something's off. And supporting that with evidence-based science. So not only have they proven intuition with peer-reviewed evidence, but they've also specifically done it with intuition in nursing, which is huge for the nursing community. So if that's the case, if it's backed up by science, it's now we need to take it out of kind of the quote unquote woo-woo closet and the 3 a.m. conversations and take it into education and talking about it openly and sharing our experiences with one another about the times that we did trust our gut and the times we were right. Solidify that it's 100% a thing. Everybody's got intuition. It's just a matter of whether or not you actually notice it when it's happening. And then if you actually do anything with it. So are you getting that kind of thick feeling in your gut that's like, I don't know. And what are you doing with it? So that's kind of nursing intuition. So that's kind of started this journey on helping new nurses grow and heal. And so I have come out with a couple of journals for nurses. So I've got a grief journal so that you can chart, so you can journal, got prompts about grief and how you're grieving. It's got spots to journal about up to 5 patient deaths, how you're doing, how you're coping, what you've learned, are you changing your practice at all? Has that affected you at home? And are you carrying that person still with you? Many nurses who've probably got more than 5 or 6 years experience already have a death of somebody who sticks with them. So it's time we kind of start unpacking that just a little bit and normalizing talking about grief and death and grieving over a stranger. There's also the nursing wellness journal, which is, kind of more of the day-to-day. How are you doing? Did you sleep? Did you eat? What did you eat? How many steps did you do? That kind of thing. And trying to very, very gently realize that I know that you're tired of caring for everybody else and you feel like you don't have time for you, but we need to kind of switch that paradigm where it is not selfish to put you first. So let's kind of take a step back and reassess some stereotypes and kind of put you first. And then the 100 Shifts journal is a journal that in the beginning has got a lot of resiliency education and like trigger identification and a couple of like little things that can help you kind of cope with coming into nursing when you're brand new and fresh and starting. And it helps you keep track of 100 shifts. So, was it day shift, night shift? What hours did you work? Did you stay late? Did you get any sleep beforehand? Again, how many steps? Did you get any water at all? Did you get break? Were you fully staffed? What was the best part of the day? What was kind of a low point of the day? And the ultimate goal is that when the nurse has that moment of having something horrific or super traumatic happen to them, you have that moment of, oh my God, what am I doing? I can't do this anymore. I'm an idiot. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know any of this. Why am I doing this to myself? I have no idea. And you get all this self-doubt going. But if you had a journal where you could actually go back into previous shifts of your own shifts and say, well, look at that day, I advocated for my patient. That day, I knew what the medication was for without having to look it up. The next day, I trusted my gut. I was able to intervene in a patient who wasn't doing too well. And it's all these little tiny moments of growth that we forget about so quickly because the negative always supersedes the positive. So when you're having that moment and you're just doubting yourself and, nurses recently are people are coming out and they're lasting a year or two and walking away from nursing completely. Not even just a change of shift, not even just a change of job or going from bedside to policy or some other thing. They're leaving nursing completely. And so this is my attempt at kind of staunching the flow where let's bring this into nursing education. Let's bring these into orientation programs. Let's try and support people before they need the support.
Yes,
Let's
beautiful.
build them up so that by the time they have that low, because there will always be a low, it's a guaranteed, and it's not just a one and done, it's a constant, depending on where you are and what you're doing, especially a specialty, like especially L&D, like it is such specialized knowledge that you're not getting your entire nursing education. You're lucky if you have one little 6-week chunk of part-time work where you get to work with mom and babes and kind of get a feel for what it is. Otherwise, you've never had access to L&D, but you've gotten hired here because you feel like that's your dream job. Sometimes it is, sometimes it really isn't. And realizing that something that you've held, a specialty that you've held on for so long and an idea that you've held on for so long, maybe just doesn't fit right now. Maybe it's just not a fit right now. Maybe it's not a fit ever, but that's okay. Like everybody's going to fit in somewhere. It's just sometimes it takes time to figure out where you're going to go and where you're going to fit. You are the puzzle piece, like you will fit into a spot. It's just sometimes it takes a little bit of time to find that spot, but please don't quit in the meantime.
Right. We need nurses now more than ever. And I feel like there's an issue with teachers leaving the profession due to burnout and the pandemic related after effects, and then certainly nurses and healthcare professionals.
Yeah, it's not just healthcare. It is everybody. Like we really need to kind of shift paradigm a little bit as to putting ourselves first and really not just making mental health and resilience buzzwords and self-care being a buzzword. Like let's get some tangible ways that we can care for ourselves and then not be met with resistance when we try to take time off for our own well-being, not get hit with guilt left, right, and center about, oh, you're leaving us short and this kind of thing. It takes a lot of courage to step away for a period of time to work on you. And it takes even more courage and self-awareness to figure out that you are more than worthwhile of the time that you spend on yourself.
Absolutely. So you mentioned the website rxforgrowth.com. How else can our listeners find your books, find you?
Yeah, so books are available on Amazon. Nursing Intuition is due out October 29th. It's on for pre-sale for Kindle right now. You can find me on TikTok and Instagram at ernurse.jenn, Jenn. Granted, the TikTok is just usually funny little cap cuts of the nursing humor, but it's been a great way to connect with people, and humor is so integral to nursing in itself that if you're not laughing, you're crying. So just me goofing around, I'm no expert. I'm not some superhero or anything like this. I'm a nurse, I'm a mom, and I'm a wife, and I'm just trying to help. And this is just my attempt at trying to help. So I'm pretty approachable and will probably answer any questions you ever throw at me, which will probably work to my detriment one of these days. But yeah, like there's lots of us out there. And if you've got a nurse who's dedicated to you during your labor birth experience, ask them all the questions. They're not necessarily at your beck and call, but we love to educate and we love to tell you. So if you've got questions about labor, right after, vaccines, anything at all, like ask us. You've got us right there. And a lot of people don't actually have access to a nurse that they can just like hit up with a, hey, what do you think about this kind of question? So,
right.
So take that time, and it is absolutely golden, especially if your nurse is kind of stuck in there with you because you're being closely monitored for one reason or another. So be kind, be nice. We're there to help. We don't have agendas. We're not really there to do anything else, but have you have hopefully your best and most comfortable birth, and ask questions, advocate, but know that sometimes situations are out of your control. If you come in with a 2-page typed birth plan, I promise you, Murphy's Law, you will have probably an emergency C-section. It's one of those things where it's just...
Yeah, nurse just makes jokes about it. I tell my clients, do a birth preference sheet, or if a hospital has a 1-page template, not be like so focused on things that are out of your control. I mean, it's up to the mother's health, how the baby or babies are responding. And
absolutely.
yeah.
That's everything. That was the one thing my midwives were like, oh, do you have a birth plan? And I'm like, we're just going to like put cap on that for right now. I said, here's my birth plan. Skin to skin as soon as possible, if possible. Breastfeeding started as soon as possible, if possible. And the biggest IV you can put on me the second my behind hits that bed. And they pushed back a little bit. They're like, oh, I don't understand. Like, why would you want an IV? It's invasive. I'm like, look, I am a career ER nurse. The moment when you have all the time in the world to look for the most beautiful IV placement that's not going to bother mom, at term, your blood volume is up 50%, which makes it so much easier to get an IV. Let's have that just in place. You can leave it alone. You don't have to hook it up to anything. You can just wrap it and forget about it. But if, heaven forbid, something happens and all of a sudden you need medications in an emergency or you're bleeding out and you need blood products, having that IV in place is the biggest safety net that you can have. And Murphy's Law, again, if something happens and you don't have an IV, all of a sudden, it is so hard to find an IV. And then you're messing around with, you're losing time trying to find an IV when you could have been already being treated.
Right.
For that
and
emergency.
Like you said, you can just get a port and
you can just leave it be. And with you still having baby in place, your blood volume's up 50%. That's why your veins are huge. It's because your blood volume, your body's already preparing for that loss of blood that's going to happen with birth. So why not take advantage of that huge gift where you got all the time in the world to like, oh, let's look over here, warm you up. Do we really need to put it in the hand? No. Like, let's see if maybe we can put it in like the middle of the arm so that you can bend your wrists and use your hands kind of thing. Like, let's do that instead of then having the emergency. We're going to probably put the IV in your elbow, which sucks. You're bending it. It hurts. It's annoying. The alarms keep beeping. It is what it is. But had we had a chance to just have you have that earlier, for me, that was just my birth plan. And knowing full well that your body is going to take over, it's going to do whatever it's going to do. Trust me when I say you have no control over what's going on. You're lucky if you can like breathe through when you want to push, like your body's telling you want to push and the staff are telling you just to hold on for a minute so that you don't tear. It's so hard because your body is not your own. So just know that. And truly, the longer and more intricate your birth preferences or birth plan is, the more opportunities you have to be let down. And not only let down, but then maybe leaning into birth trauma. So don't set yourself up for failure when you're having all these expectations, because really, the less expectations you have, the happier in the birth you will be. Because it gives room for flexibility and it gives room for movement and change, and things happen in an instant that nobody prepared for or that nobody was expecting, right? So just be flexible and try your best to just go with the flow, because it will make it easier on you long term.
Beautiful. I agree. Well, thank you for sharing all of your personal journey and your wisdom with us. And I would love to have you on again in the future, Jenn.
Absolutely. Anytime. Had a blast.
It was awesome. Take good care.
Will do. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to Ask the Doulas. For more information about Gold Coast Doulas, visit us on our website, goldcoastdoulas.com. We're also on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and give us a 5-star review. Thank you. Remember, these moments are golden.